Good afternoon, boa tarde. No, it's okay. I'm big enough and ugly enough to introduce myself. I am honoured to be here. Like many people who search the world for friends, I was one of those, and Porto took me on board, and for that I am forever emotional. They took me on board when I was a new consultant, and they gave me power and confidence to do things. And what I have the pleasure of doing today is teaching you youngsters what history you have. Because I'm going to talk today about the European trauma course. And to do that, I need to cover history. We are Europeans. We have lived history. We have fought. You had a good trading nation. It's now shit. We had a good trading nation. It is also shit. So we need to look at history. We need to look at our early drivers. We need to look at our late drivers. But this is the important thing. It's the challenges not I face, not Carl faces, not Antonia faces. It's you. So let's look back in time. I'm going to take you in a time capsule back to round about the mid-90s, going on to 2000. And there was in existence a fabulous, fabulous trauma course. The ATLS, many of you will have done. Some of you, well, all you'll have heard about it. This was created, as you're aware, from a family tragedy in the 70s, and a guy called Bob Steiner developed the ATLS. And it went from strength to strength. It spread from Nebraska throughout the United States and went international. It spread up to 60 countries, over 30,000 instructors, and over 1 million people have been trained in it. It was put forward for a Nobel Prize in medicine. It had that big an impact. ATLS is good. It's good because its content is deceptively simple. It gives you a system. It empowers you to treat the patient even if you don't know the full story. It gives you the power to go after the life-threatening conditions. It gives you the power to work beyond your speciality. It's backed up now by a phenomenal organization, the American College of Surgeons, which have implemented a wonderful quality control system, and it's redone every 3, 4 or so years. Why aren't we doing the ATLS? Why am I here to talk to you about the ETC? The problem, and I go back to the 2000 period, the year 2000, these were the problems Antonio, Carl, I, and several other persons faced. The first, did it reflect European reality? Now, this is a photograph from a recent ATLS course in the Philippines. This is one person resuscitating the patient. Now, I've had the privilege of working in Portugal or teaching in Portugal many times. This, in many cases, is your reality. You work on your own. You may be assisted by the odd nurse. Occasionally, you may get 1 or 2 people, but by and large, you're having to work on your own. But if we look European-wide, people are working in teams. So that's the first alarm bell. The second alarm bell, if we go back to the 2000s, was they did not recognize important specialities out with surgery. If we look at the manual in 2000, they had surgeons, every single variety of it. They had emergency physicians. We had just arrived. That was good. They had veterinary surgeons and educationalists. There was not one anaesthetist. That is not the European reality. It was and still is expensive to import into your country. And it's linked to surgeons. The philosophy behind it is that trauma is a surgical disease. The problem in Europe is round about 60% of trauma requires surgery, and certainly in the UK, only 25% of that requires surgery in the first 6 hours. But they obviously still require resuscitation. The next problem was we had developed educationally. We were certainly in agreement that you had to be didactic in a basic course, but if you're going to go advanced, as in the name ATLS, you had to assume that there were more than one ways of actually treating a condition. So you couldn't be didactic. You had to sort of go for consensus. You had to appreciate there are different views. Now, all of those would have been acceptable except for the deal breaker. And again, I'm not talking about now, I'm talking the year 2000. And the deal breaker was the Americans were not interested in listening to European views. So a lot of countries carried on doing ATLS. And that was okay, but there was a desire, building up desire, that a number of people just weren't comfortable. So what were the drivers? Well, the drivers were politics. And I have to be honest here, a number of people wanted something different from ATLS because they didn't like the Americans. And I thought that was a big risk. They had a huge repertoire of knowledge and skills. They had wonderful quality control system, but there was a bit of xenophobia out there. And so they wanted something which was European, but I suspected they didn't want to buy into the pain of maintaining that. So a number of papers were written both for and against. So there was a bit of unrest. And then there was a number of articles pinpointing certain areas of ATLS where people weren't entirely happy. They had a predilection for going for surgical airways rather than other anaesthetic skills because they had divorced the anaesthetist from the system. There was concerns about fluid management even after Bickles had produced all that work. So there was beginning to build up a momentum. So what happened? Well, a great, great man who was responsible for many biological conceptions also came to the fore. Peter Basket, Lord bless his soul, wanted something which was European. And he was a charismatic man who certainly stimulated me, and he stimulated lots of people, and he produced many conceptions. Some of them were children. But the thing was that he wanted a European course to answer European needs, and he was assisted by a guy called Wolfgang Dick, a professor from Germany. And Wolfgang Dick said, right, what we need to do, ATLS is good, right, let's just get a group of people together and develop a pre-hospital care course. So this group of people got together in 2003. with the aim of developing a pre-hospital care course. And it was like the First World War. And I knew immediately why there was never going to be a European course. You know, they couldn't organize themselves. But over 24 hours, and a very neat thing by this guy over here was Italian. He locked the doors. You couldn't get to the toilet. You had to make a decision, focus the mind. There was a decision making, and the decision was, right, we would develop 2 courses. There would be a pre-hospital trauma course, which would be run by these clever people because they had a lot of experience in it. And the Portuguese and the UK were going to develop the hospital-based trauma course. I want you to talk to the person next to you to figure out why did those 2 countries get that slot. You have 30 seconds to figure it out. Chat. Chat. Why did Britain and Portugal get that slot? Why did they get that duty? Do you know? It was because of him. What happened was, a few years previously, Portugal wanted a trauma course, and they couldn't afford ATLS. Historically, because of Carl Gwinnett, he had links, and he said, look, you've helped us out on the ALS course, can you help us produce a temporary trauma course which will cover us until we can get the shekels together to buy an ATLS course. So Carl and I, with much coffee, no port, wrote that course. And we came over and we did it. And it was fine. We did it, it was good, and it was based on stuff which we'd written, so there wasn't a copyright problem, everything was tickety-boo. So there was a link there. 2 years later, I came back to Portugal, and this is the important thing. Portugal had changed what Carl and I had originally written. They had developed it. They had included new things, but they'd done something incredibly important. They had removed most of the lectures. It was their concept to move to an interactive teaching block. They were doing it in workshops, but the concept was pure gold. There are a number of things in history where things link together. We've been given this remit to produce a European course. I'll give you 30 seconds to read that list. I came away from Italy, got the list, I was happy, no problem, but it wasn't going to be on the top of my priorities. Then something happened. And the thing which happened was here. That little dot in the Mediterranean is Malta. Who the hell's heard of Malta? Well, a lady who was in charge of the emergency department was at a conference. She also had wanted to produce ATLS in Malta, but could not afford it. But she had some money. She was at a conference and she heard Carl Gwinnett talk about this agreement in Italy and that there was going to be this European course. She nailed him after that conference and said, I want the first course, the first pilot to be done in Malta. Carl came back slightly ashen, it has to be said. Carl and I worked in the same hospital, and he said, we've got a problem. Peter, he always came to my department when I knew it was going to be my problem. And he said, we've got 9 months, they've already rostered, timetabled this in Malta. Shit! So, we had to produce an ETC in 9 months. It was a wonderful, wonderful time, but it would not have happened without the experience of Portugal. Because from that, we changed the concept completely of how trauma courses would be done to try and facilitate that shopping list of things we had to aim for. So we needed to make it European. Therefore, it had to be team-based. It could not be an individual practitioner working sequentially through it. So everybody needs to know how to play football when you put them in the football team, but then you have to teach them how to play as a team. So that became one of the key concepts. It had to be versatile and egalitarian. We had to be able to put the whole of the kit in a van and drive it to Eastern Europe. We had to be able to take it out of the van and do the course. That's how the Scandinavians do it. They put all their courses together and they go up to the tundra, they take it all out, teach people, and then come back. Drunk, it has to be said. So we needed something which could work in a hotel. We've just finished an ETC in a hotel. It needed to work in a educational centre, in a hospital. It needed to work in a state-of-the-art simulation suite. Key thing, underneath all of this, it had to be all built into a laptop. All the workshops, all the data, all the cases, all the images, everything had to be into a laptop. Because we could take the laptop anywhere. We could attach the laptop to a projector, or we could just do it as this, in groups, working around the laptop. It had to have kit which was relevant for that particular country. It had to have a level of mannequins, both basic and advanced, but ideally everything had to be done on a mannequin. More of that in a second, because we changed it even further later on. And it had to fit in with the educational model. This is an ETC course, and it is a common appearance. It's a discussion. It's a discussion in the team, what is the best way to manage this? There are protocols, don't get me wrong, but often there are many different ways of managing it. So it is working from a didactic, or changing from a didactic principle to a community of practice. To back that education up, we needed good quality data. We needed to analyse what was happening, how it was going over, how we had to change it. So we were pretty chill. It was working. My anal sphincter tone was coming back under control. I was pretty good, and it was fine. But it spread. It spread quite fast. And we started getting feedback, obviously, from the candidates and the faculty, but we then inherited 4 parents. I had enough problems with Peter Baskett being my father, but I now had 4 parents. And they don't like one another. And so there was politics there, but they did have some really good input. But they wanted changes. So again, just take a few moments to look at those changes. They wanted, not just the organisations, but the candidates as well, wanted a manual rather than a textbook. So we did that. But included in that textbook, we had to increase human factors, the non-technical skills. So we covered a lot of the technical things as you'd anticipate. This is basically the format we used in Portugal. But to that, we needed to beef up the non-technical side. Again, a long list. Just read the big headings. Because we're dealing with teams, and we had to get that through to people. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these by any means, but I'm going to take one in particular, which is a very pertinent thing, and that's communication. Now, this is a classic position or posture in an ETC. You have a team leader here, and he's briefing his team prior to the patient arriving. Now, the thing is, he's the only person who knows what's happened pre-hospital. He has to communicate that through to his team. So he has a clear mental model, which I'm simulating with that cartoon. Driver, unrestrained, frontal impact, chest injuries. If you could get into the head of some of the players, you'll find that some of them have got it just slightly wrong. Slightly abnormal, possibly a different position of the body or whatever. Some can have it even more wrong. They're thinking that the person is coming in by a land ambulance rather than by a helicopter, by paramedics rather than by a medical team. A fundamental assumption could be made and it could be wrong. And without a shadow of a doubt in the Mediterranean, you've got people who have no interest at all and are having micro sleeps. Now he has to figure out what's going on, and he has to run it, has to communicate. So these are elements which are covered in the ETC. One of the things which we do also to drive it forward is we give role cards. Again, if you've got an all singing, all dancing simulation suite, you can have the mannequin giving you all this, but that's not versatile. It's not egalitarian. So we have role cards and people reveal information at the key time. So it's a bit like a jigsaw. It has to build together, and if you don't communicate, you don't get the full picture. And into that, we have some flexibility. So the patient could either arrive with limited pre-hospital treatment or a full medical resource. And that will affect how things go and the future communication. We have to build up monitoring. Again, monitors are very expensive. They're used for patients, etc. So we developed our laptops to have all the vital signs and we could adapt them. So again, it was all on our kit, which we could take. We wanted to look at also imaging. So again, we downloaded ultrasound images, etc., onto the laptop so people could get those images if they were doing it appropriately in the resus room. We adapted also how you should look at x-rays, giving people a system. We looked at assessment. We had summative assessment, but we added on a very detailed continuous assessment, looking at not only skills, but also human factors. So things were getting okay, but we're moving now to current time. And we'd evolved, we had got experience, we had achieved certain things, but there were challenges. The first one was, is it absolutely bespoke for local needs? Have we got enough scenarios to cover all the variability which exists in Europe? The answer is no. We need much more scenarios. People have said that though we cover paediatrics, should there be a specific paediatric ETC course? We don't know. One which is very pertinent for Portugal, should there be a course which incorporates nurses? At the moment, we just treat everybody as a trauma team member. Now, these are good developments, good challenges. What we have to avoid is we do not make the final evolutionary step into a cul-de-sac. And as far as course development is, this person is British, he's on Faro Beach at the very moment, is a depiction of complacency. This is the death knell for course development. What we need is quality control. We need, as we expand, to ensure that there are standards, and those standards are met consistently. That therefore has to be based upon an infrastructure, not just simply training your instructors, but the whole panoply of things to make sure that the structure and the course happens. And to make sure it remains relevant, it has to be backed up by research. What is the impact? Is it producing any healthcare benefit? So in summary, ETC was produced in response to drivers to needs. Those were met, and then there were secondary drivers and needs. You've seen that there are currently still challenges there. But if we have made progress at all, it's because it was based upon ATLS. It was based upon the founding fathers' training with ATLS and the philosophy which told us that we could develop a system. So my final comment is the paraphrase from Sir Isaac Newton, who said, if we have made progress, if we have looked further, in this case in trauma, education and care, it's because we have built ourselves on standing on the shoulders of giants. Thank you very much.